Okay, good afternoon. We'll get going in just a second. Hope everyone had a great weekend, enjoyed the long weekend, and celebrated Memorial Day. From a market standpoint, if you're following along, let's see how we did today. I'll take a look. Viacom was up 17 cents, so nothing earth-shattering there. I sold out of my VIP shop, which is a Chinese discount retailer, up, I would say, pretty significantly, 70, 80 cents a share. And all our other holdings are doing quite well. Ford I sold last week, and that was a really good week for Ford. Palantir I sold it and did well. So I'm actually really just holding Viacom right now and I have ETFs and stuff, but Viacom is my main account. What I'm going to do probably in about 2 weeks is start doing a financial podcast in the mornings, and probably actually do some trades on that podcast, do it live, starting around 9 o'clock in the morning, go from 9 to 10, talk finance, talk news. I trade based on news, things that move the markets. And part of that will be discussing saving money and getting ahead. And so those who have watched this podcast for a long time know the passion that I have for financial literacy, saving money, the freedom that brings. Like I said, it doesn't matter what race you are, sex you are, age you are. The stock market doesn't care. If you buy into a company, you buy into a company. And that's from a personal experience. As raised as a Jehovah's Witness, we believed the end of the world was coming. And so we didn't really save money. And so when I left at 28, I had to figure out on my own how to start saving and investing and planning for the future. And so I think that's a huge aspect for most people's lives, and we need to get back to that. So we'll talk about that in the future, but hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll start that process. So that's our stocks for today. From a conversation standpoint today, I have a few things on the list, but I just saw a headline from the New Haven Register, and it's on the need or the desire by parents to have a field. We talked about this at length last week, and I just found it interesting that, in the headline, it says residents call for new field and Walsh renovation project. Officials say it's not likely, citing cost and timing. I did not hear any discussion that said it's not likely. The owner's rep for the current Walsh project said it's not part of that project. And the reason it can't be part of that project is there are incentives for getting projects done on time. And when you start extending that and adding things to the project, it changes management, changes costs. That team may be committed elsewhere once the Walsh project is done. But really what we talked about was it's a separate project. And the Board of Ed simply needs to send a letter to the first selectman or the Board of Selectmen and say, can you start this project? And that may require going to the Board of Finance and RTM and getting $100,000 for design. Might require some RFPs, requests for proposals out there. That's fine, but the Board of Ed has to initiate that process. They own the property. It has to start with that. So I don't know, the Register has kind of been the paper record for a long time, but with all their cutbacks, they rarely have people assigned just to a town anymore. It used to be a writer would be here for years, and so they would know the history. They would know what was going on. Now they're going to one meeting, taking 4 or 5 quotes and calling it an article. It's not always the best source of information. So in any event, I cannot see if the Board of Ed says, Jamie Cosgrove, start this process. We'd like you to start this process. It's moving forward. I don't see a situation, unless they say no, where that doesn't move forward. So, and good afternoon to those saying hi. The topic that jumped out at me today was that of Osaka. So to those of you who don't know what tennis is, tennis has the world of tennis and Roger Federer and Nadal and Serena Williams and all these stars. They have 4 what we call majors: the French Open, Australian Open, US Open, and Wimbledon. These are the big tournaments of the year. People are paid large amounts of money for these tournaments. And part of getting accepted to go to these tournaments is that the players do press. After their match, they meet the press. This is as old as sports are, or is, or I don't know what the word is there. Players, whether they win or lose, do press. Now, on occasion, players back out of that and they're fined. And that's happened. Djokovic has done it. I know in basketball, players have done it on a regular basis, what have you. The value of going to the press, however, is millions of dollars in the pockets of these players. The press that these leagues have gotten, whether it's the NBA, whether it's the Major League Baseball, whether it's football or tennis, has resulted in massive, massive exposure and has resulted in these tennis players, even middling tennis players, making millions of dollars, being very, very wealthy. The average NBA salary is like $5.5 in basketball, $5.5 million. So if you're at the end of the bench, the average salary is still about that. No, not every player makes that, but that's the average. In tennis, the fact that superstars have met the press, have promoted those events for years, has been significant and has helped future generations make a lot more money as exposure grew. And once exposure grows, they're on TV, the demand for those TV rights grows, advertising against those things grows, and so you have million-dollar payouts for these tournaments. When you go to the tournament, when you accept an invitation to the tournament, you are agreeing to do press, to meet with the press after your matches. And so we have this situation, and it's an interesting situation, and I don't know that I have a stance on it yet. And just reading it, Naomi Osaka kind of took the world by storm a couple years ago. If you remember that moment where Serena Williams lost her mind at the US Open, where she was yelling at somebody, that was against Naomi Osaka. Osaka was a huge upset that day, and she won, beat Serena Williams. She is, I could probably say, one of my favorite players. She's quiet. She's not obnoxious or loud. She's the opposite of a John McEnroe. Goes about her game, very solid game. Can play offensively, can play defensively. Really strong player to watch. And if you're a tennis fan, you probably like men and women equally, because the women's game is more built around skill and finesse. Men's game is built around power. Women are probably more fun to watch. As a tennis player who can never match what Nadal is doing, you like seeing people use skill and finesse on the tennis court. So Osaka's brilliant on the court. She has always been quiet. In the past, she did have some rough times in front of the press. And so she announced before the French Open this year that she was not going to do any press. And I want to make sure we have the facts right here, so I have exactly what she said. So she posted, this is before French Open started. The French Open is the tennis tournament started. Hope you're all doing well. I'm writing this to say that I'm not going to do any press during Roland Garros. I've often felt that people have no regard for athletes' mental health, and this rings very true whenever I see a press conference or partake in one. We're often sat there and asked questions that we've been asked multiple times before, or asked questions that bring doubt into our minds, and I'm just not going to subject myself to people that doubt me. I've watched many clips of athletes breaking down after a loss in the press room, and I know you have as well. I believe that whole situation is kicking a person while they're down. I don't understand the reasoning behind it. Me not doing press is nothing personal to the tournament. I have a couple journalists have interviewed me since I was young, so I have a friendly relationship with most of them. However, the organizations that think they can just keep them, the tweet ends. So that's the majority of it that they shared here. Now, Roland Garros responded by saying, hold on a second, if you don't do press, we're going to fine you $15,000. That's comes with the territory. Other people have skipped the press and just paid the fine, and she seemed completely fine to pay it. So she goes and wins her first match. She actually did press with someone on the court and then refused to do her press conference afterwards. She was fined the $15,000, and then she wrote a message saying, I think now is the best thing for the tournament, the other players, and my well-being is that I withdraw so that everyone can get back to focusing on tennis going on in Paris. I never wanted to be a distraction. I accept my timing was not ideal, and my message could have been clearer. More importantly, I would never trivialize mental health or use the term lightly. And so, the French Open came back and said, we're sorry that she's going through this. French Open said that they tried to reach out to her. She would refuse to meet with anybody. They wanted to see if she was healthy. They refused to meet with anybody. And then all of a sudden, sports stars from around the world came out with tweets in support or questioning it. Now, some of them have tweets in support of her and want her to get well, but at the same time, like Billie Jean King came out and said, listen, press is part of the job. And in the age of political correctness, in the age of addressing mental health issues, in the age of seemingly looking at issues that may have existed for a long time for the first time, the question that I have, and again, I don't have an answer to this, but I've been thinking about it all day, reading all these articles this morning, is what obligation does someone have to fulfill the job requirements when accepting a job? If you accept the responsibility of playing tennis, part of that responsibility to play in a professional, and we're not talking about in your backyard, is to fulfill these obligations. An interview on court and an interview afterwards, whether you win or lose. And yes, many players have broken down in these interviews. And I don't think it's a question that she suffers from depression. She said it before. In previous press conferences, it was clear there was something not quite right. So the question is this: what allowances should the French Open or tennis or basketball or football or baseball in general make for those that don't want to do press conferences? What should they do to change the standards for one person, especially when we realize the popularity of tennis, the popularity of football, basketball isn't just based on what they did on the field. It was putting faces to those winning teams. Michael Jordan single-handedly elevated basketball, not just by how good he was at basketball, how personable he was, how he was with the press. He dealt with them constantly. If you saw that great documentary, you saw that. He did his press conferences. He did those things. And every basketball player afterwards benefited greatly. Osaka is the wealthiest or the highest paid tennis player in the world last year. The question is, do you demonize the business based on a business model that has built that business? So people like Steph Curry came out and said, oh, this is terrible, but I support her completely. And many other players came out and said, I support her completely. We need to change this. Well, if we didn't have press conferences before that, you would not have players that make anywhere near what they make today. If you didn't have press conferences before that, you wouldn't have the press assigned to follow these players. You wouldn't have the personal stories told behind the athletes that have personalized these leagues. So while I have sympathy for the mental illness aspect, what I don't have sympathy for is her not meeting with officials, not looking for a solution for this. And could there have been another solution? Possibly. Maybe one or two members of the press that are respected met with her and asked her some questions, and that was it, instead of make a room of 30 of them. It is kind of ridiculous sometimes. These stars have to walk into a room with 20 cameras facing them, facing questions that they've heard 1,000 times. There's no question about that. I don't watch most press conferences for that reason. There's nothing that press member can ask typically that hasn't been asked 20 times before. But we do have a question of what is the obligation of the business? What is the obligation of a business that isn't sports related? An accounting firm, a law firm, a Amazon warehouse. If somebody says, I cannot do a function of the job, is it still their obligation to offer that job? Is it still an obligation to pay the exact same amount they would have paid otherwise if they can't do that job? Now, legally, some allocations can be made. When you fill out a job application, sometimes there are questions there that says, is there any reason you can't do some of this, and can we make some stipulations? But in general, that business loses money if they don't fulfill those obligations. And it was an interesting question. I mean, I've been debating it all day long. I've been reading more and more about it, and I'm a fan of hers. I think she's a phenomenal athlete. And I am very much a fan of the way she goes about it. I remember that match at the US Open where Serena basically completely out of line, lost her mind, was yelling at the ref, just completely gone. And Osaka was calm, cool, and collected. And someone that young against a massive superstar like Serena, not losing her mind, was impressive. And then she started up again and then kept winning, and it was just spectacular tennis. And she has played spectacular tennis throughout her life. And she has been made very, very wealthy on the backs of many, 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 many players before her who did something they very likely didn't want to do. And Novak Djokovic, yeah, he probably wants to do them. He enjoys them. Agassi probably wanted to do them. McEnroe, I'm sure he wanted to do them. But most players don't. They're there for the game, but part of the obligation when they accept an opportunity to win millions of dollars by winning a tournament, and even that, she won her first round, that's probably something in the $70,000, $80,000 in winnings against the $15,000 fine that she faced. It just raises a bigger question. Mental illness is real, no question about it. Mental illness impacts people's ability to do a job. When you accept a job, you have an obligation to perform everything that job lists. Does that employer have an obligation to make an allowance for you? I don't know the answer to that. And it really has been on my mind all day long. And it's an interesting dilemma. We'll talk about that later in the week. Think about it. If there's an opinion, let me know, and we'll talk about it later in the week, and I'll keep reading more about it and go from there. Final thing today is income tax rates. So Biden came out today with a change. I want to pull this up. So the proposed is 39.6% on the tax on a tax rate on the top levels. This would be basically to pay for the American Families Plan. The rate would affect single individuals with taxable income of more than $452,000 and married couples filing jointly with income over $509,300, according to a budget proposal. The top rate is slated to increase to 39.6% after 2025. So the current tax break that Trump passed a few years ago expires in 2025. So this top rate grows to that point at that point anyway. The question becomes, at what point do they start taxing people? So the top rate would apply to single individual taxable income of more than 452 and married couples over 509. Heads of households, income thresholds are lower than the current law. So the real change isn't necessarily the top rate. The top rate would go in there 2 or 3 years earlier, but the real change is in the level of people paying it. So currently, a married couple pays that rate at $628,000. That will be lowered to $509,000. A single person pays that top rate at $523,000. That will be lowered to $452,000. And head of household is known as married filing a separate return $314,000 to $254,000. So we are lowering the point at which people pay the top income tax rate. To put that in perspective, when you have a 39.6% income tax rate, that's federal. You're also going to have a high rate on a state level. Basically, half of your revenue goes to taxes at that point. And granted, so let's look at what it would actually cost. If it goes for a couple that earns $628,000, first of all, if you earn $628,000, congratulations, that's nice. That is in Brantford about 8 times the median income. So congratulations. That 628, instead of halving that, or we'll say 315 going to taxes, it will lower down to 509. So that's 255 to 315. So you will pay about an extra $60,000 in taxes if that were to happen. Under Biden's plan, if you make more than $628,000 or make exactly $628,000, you will pay about an additional $60,000 in taxes. And that's what will pay for this Families Plan. The Families Plan pays some years of college. It adds the thing I love the most, childcare at a lower level. More tax breaks for kids. I'm not a huge fan of those tax breaks for kids, primarily because I'd rather see it go towards childcare to make sure people can get to work. So it's expected to raise $132 billion over 5 years. That's what the Treasury Department is saying. The problem is it's going to go up in 2025 anyway. So that number really doesn't make any sense to me. And so, we talk about taxes a lot, and I get a lot of questions on taxes, and people question them. I have no problem with taxes. I have no problem with people who make more paying more. I have a problem with what we saw with the stimulus package, where we see spending being too high and it doesn't need to be. And you have this problem where people aren't going back to work, they're getting extra money. Much of the stimulus packages, as much as the economy's back, much of the money in those stimulus packages has not been spent yet. It was sold as an effort to get people to rebound after the pandemic, but much of the money is not even being spent for a year or two. That's a problem. It's one thing to raise taxes to pay for legitimate issues when we're paying for ideology or to push an agenda as part of, hey, it's a recovery bill. That's simply dishonest. It's simply not true. And that's where, from a political standpoint, we have to start asking ourselves, are our elected officials honest about what they're spending money on? You know, we have an infrastructure bill coming up. It's called an infrastructure bill. Is everything in there actually infrastructure? And that's not Democratic or Republican. It's just a question. If somebody's selling you a bill of goods, you want to know what's in that bill of goods. If they're labeling it as something, you want to make sure it's appropriately labeled. You know, I called this for years when I was talking about religion, my Toyota Camry theory is that when the salesman who's selling you a Toyota Camry, he will always tell you the Camry is the best car. And he will always encourage you to buy it then. He doesn't want you going researching other things or questioning anything. The same thing is true with most politicians. They're going to sell you a bill of goods, and some of it may be great. Toyota Camry is a good car. Is it the best car? Is there a way to do it better? And should that prevent us from listening to other ideas, listening to other concepts, and questioning those proposals coming out? In this case, looking at some of the past spending, I do question, and I've spoken against that last stimulus package. It was just too big. So it's always, higher taxes is not the end of the world. Spending money on things that are not directly going to the people, not helping them get back to work, not helping them get childcare at a young age, not helping them get educated. I question the use of that money. And that's true on a state level as well. We have taxes being proposed up. Lamont doesn't want to sign them, but certainly significant taxes are being proposed. It'll be interesting to see what comes of those. We're seeing a lot of people fighting them, a lot of signs against these taxes. At some point, you have to raise something. But you should also have to ask the same question, do these laws make sense? Is it actually helping us get something done? I've raised that question a million times with the housing laws. This new housing law doesn't make any sense. It does not help anybody get more housing. It certainly doesn't help the poor get more housing. Who benefits from it? Huge, huge developers. Some nonprofits, leaders who make a lot of money pushing an agenda, and developers make a lot of money from it. The biggest beneficiary of the new housing law? Lawyers. Because laws pass with these vagaries in them. You know, your new code has to say, instead of allowing affordable housing, it has to promote affordable housing. So now the lawyers get to decide in court, what does that mean? What does it mean to promote affordable housing? What does the wording in there have to be? And so who's going to make a lot of money? Tim Hollister. Tim Hollister is the state's most well-known affordable housing lawyer. He'll make a fortune on these new laws. Under the guise that we're sold, just like a Toyota Camry salesman, that here's an affordable housing law and it's helpful to the people that are most needy. No. It's helpful to developers. It's helpful to the leaders of a few nonprofits, and that's their agenda. And it's helpful to the lawyers who are going to make a fortune fighting the wording of this in court. And that's why we have to question these things. The same thing with taxes. Right? We have to raise taxes because of this bill. Well, does that bill actually help people? Does everything in the bill go to the same goal? So that's just some rants for today. The Osaka thing was interesting. All day, I've been reading more and more and different opinions on that. And it was interesting to see even how articles are written. You know, articles very often will tell one side of the story. Billie Jean King came out with multiple quotes saying, yes, we have to do press, but I also feel for Osaka. And the article would take what side of that they wanted to take. That's always interesting to me. We see that in all of our press. Connecticut Mirror has an agenda supporting affordable housing. It always has. It has for years. It's crazy. They take, you know, they don't talk about Branford's anymore, if you notice. Branford's was a disaster. And it had nothing to do with the town. It was Beacon was a disaster. All the things were nuts. They're replacing current, but they talk about Woodbridge and the racist and all the other stuff. They take whatever quote helps them and they eliminate the quote that doesn't help them. And they post to their agenda or not to that agenda. And so it's an interesting thing that we see, but go back to that, my Toyota Camry. If you realize that the people selling you things are selling you things, they don't want you to research things. They don't want you to look deeper. They don't want you to leave that showroom. They want you to buy it. If they can get you to buy it, they're done. They did their job. We see this with political parties. We see this with religion. You walk into a Democratic town committee meeting or a Republican town committee meeting, their goal is that everybody walks out of there on the same page. The one thing they can't let happen is people who think for themselves to walk outside and say, okay, now let me challenge what I just heard. Affordable housing law. Oh my God, we have to help people that are hurting the most. We have to help these people find housing. Has it worked so far? Of the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in tax credit that were given out for this affordable housing law, has it worked? If you're still fighting this fight, that law passed forever ago. It's clearly not working for you. And you want to change it and then tweak it under some guise that if we have accessory houses, it's going to help them. No, it's not. Now, some of the law is fine. You want to train them more on affordable housing and you want to get your members certified on it, so be it. A lot of that's nothing. But the wife of the Hartford mayor, Bronin, live tweeted during the discussion in the Senate things that were simply misleading. And so you have, and I saw this on social media. So the Madison Democratic Town Committee, I think, posted it, completely misleading. But that's what they sell to their base. In fact, one of the wording was spectacular. You know what? I'll look it up right now. If you're on social media, you can do this. I believe it was the Madison Town Committee, and I love the wording of this. Madison CT Democrats. They posted this. See if I can find it now. Oh, here it is. Lots of misinformation and scare tactics out there. This bill reflects positive changes and not eliminate local control. No one said it eliminates local control, first of all, but allows accessory units like in-law apartments. No, that's not. It allows as of right. They were allowed before under a special exception under most towns. Some towns had it as of right, but it drastically changes it. In the past, you were able to say in-law apartment had to have a family member in it. You're able to say it had to be attached. Those stipulations are gone. So no, it's not accessory units like in-law apartments, not even remotely close. Offers training to volunteer planning and zoning officials. Yeah, okay. That training is basically affordable housing indoctrination, but that's fine. No problem. They're smart enough to figure that. Promotes better water and energy efficiency. In some cases, I don't mind that. It does not take away all local control. Yeah, no one said it takes away all local control. It reduces local control. So they're throwing this crap out there and saying, oh my God, if they fight this, and they're crazy. No, you're misleading people. The bill does remove local control on accessory apartments. Right now, on accessory apartments, by the way, they're attached. That you can stipulate that they fit with the community or not. You can stipulate that they attached or not. You can stipulate who stays in there, that it be a relative or not. Now, you don't have to stipulate any of those things. Two, in the past, it was a special exception, which mandated a public hearing, which meant neighbors were notified. You ever went to a public hearing, first thing the lawyer gets up and says, here's the letters we sent to the neighbors to tell them this public hearing was happening. Legally, they have to do that. Now they don't. Second question is, how many accessory apartments can you have? If I buy 3 acres and build a house and want 7 accessory apartments, what's to stop me? As of right, I can do it. Then the other question is this. In this law, I had no intention of going off on this, but in this law, there are opt-out clauses. You have the ability in this law to opt out of it. Now, let me ask you this. We passed Ethan's law a couple years back. Was there an opt-out clause in that? Did they say, hey, listen, some towns, if politically there's no will for this and you have, 80% or 2/3 people don't want this, then you can opt out of that? Was there an opt-out clause for that? No. For taxes, is there an opt-out clause? Do they say, listen, if the town doesn't want these taxes, they can opt out? Did they ever say that? No. Why the hell would you have an opt-out clause if it's a good bill? Why pass the bill? This bill makes no sense. It's stupid. Lamont should veto it. It makes no sense at all. Hi, here's a bill. We're passing this because we really need it. It's helping things. It's making our laws better. But if you don't want it, then you could vote against it. That makes sense? Show me other significant bills that really made life better for Connecticut residents that you can suddenly opt out of. Show me one that made sense. So what's going to happen? The opt-out requires planning and zoning to opt out to vote for it. Republican towns will all do that for the most part. And then it requires a 2/3 vote by the legislature, and the Republican towns will do that. So the towns that they're trying to push this on, like Greenwich, they'll opt out. The towns that don't have the political will to do it, they won't opt out. So Madison probably won't. Branford doesn't have enough Republicans to opt out of it. They may after election, who knows? So those towns get hurt with these regulations, which made life better, but some towns get to avoid it. How does that make sense? Show me a bill that's a good bill, in a law that's a good law, in a rule that's a good rule that allows some people to say, oh, we don't want it. Explain. Somebody. How does that make sense? I didn't see these comments here. I'm sorry. Visit 169 Strong. The website has a deep dive on the different sections of the bill, as well as Democrats' spin on myths versus facts. We had a long discussion on this last week. Replying to Amy Stefnowski, the Dems have been putting forth spin like you say, Steve, but here's the unbiased Mythbusters. Okay, I'll go read it. But I, live in a podcast last week, opened the bill, showed people how to get to the OLR report, and you can actually read the OLR report. So yes, if you want to go to those that are against it, that's fine, read all the facts. But go directly to the OLR report, the Office of Legislative Research. Go to that report. Legislators have to get that before voting on their bill. And it tells you what it does. It shows you the changes. Going from an exception to as of right means when you buy the property, you have a right to do this. It can't be questioned. So the only thing that applies in are building codes, the height and setbacks. I saw nothing in there that would limit me to one accessory apartment. We have had approvals in Branford, where I am, that have said we have to make sure it's a family member. Now, what is the implications of this? We hear people use words that are just, well, this is going to be an in-law apartment. What size? If the main house is 3,000 square feet and the accessory house is 2,000 square feet and it has 4 bedrooms in it, is that not covered? I don't see anything that says a size that's covered in the law. Who's going to win? Lawyers. Because the law is bullshit. It's just vague nonsense. The lawyers will win. A lawyer will go fight it. Towns will have to put out money to fight it. And the lawyers are going to win because the law is nonsense. It allows all these things that don't make sense. And then why pass a law that you can opt out of? How is that a good law? I got this great law. It's perfect. It really helps us. It moves us forward as a people. But if you don't want it, you could opt out. How does that make sense? Toyota Camry. The salespeople are selling you something. They don't want you to ask questions. So if you want to go to ct169strong.org, do it. That's okay. Remember, that's one view. Democrats have another view. Go to the state legislative site, look at the law, find what's called the OLR report, the Office of Legislative Research, and put it out there. Chris, I don't know who sponsored the law. We could probably answer that pretty quickly. but it's a bunch of nonprofits that are fair housing advocates that push for the law. And it was a much different law. A lot of the law has changed. It was far more ridiculous to begin with. And then what happens is they pass something to get something passed. Maria, yes, much harder to meet a 2/3 threshold to opt out of both the local P&Z and local governing authority. Also, the working group is very concerning. I mean, a good number of housing advocates are in it as prior bills, and one person selected from a town population of 30. Why just that demographic? Yeah, the bill's crazy. I don't know. Does anybody have an indication of if Lamont is going to sign this? I tell you, in Branford, I'm proud of Robin Comey, and I know she did it politically and she had to, but I'm proud of the fact that she voted against it. But this is a bad bill. And when we have Sean on again and he comes on a regular basis, I'll ask him what he was thinking here. I just don't understand what the thought process is. And the same thing for Christine Cohen, who's our rep here, what the thought process is on this bill. Makes no sense. That said, we'll get to that in another day. But again, you can get both sides of this, but go to the source. Get the source documents. Go to the state legislative site. Go on the get the OLR report, and you can read all the changes there. No, what the Democrats posted is not true. It does remove significant levels of local control. And not just local control as in planning and zoning, local control as in neighborhoods. It removes the necessity that a public hearing take place in many, many towns. In many towns, an accessory apartment is a special exception. This eliminates that. When it's a special exception, it's allowed under the underlying zone, but it requires a public hearing. Neighbors have a say. There are reasons they can deny it. They can stipulate some things. They're removing all of those stipulations. They're removing the public hearing aspect of it. They're removing local and neighborhood control. That's a fact. It's not a question. No matter what the Madison Democrats want to post, that's a fact. It's not a question. It's in the OLR report. Read it. All right, guys, we'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Thanks for joining me tonight. I will hope you have a great night. It's beautiful outside, and I will see you tomorrow at 4.